Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, it's good to be with all of you, and I'm excited to share this information today. So we're going to talk about how our thoughts and our experiences shape our brain. So matters of the mind, what we're talking about is now more than ever, we really need to notice and hold in awareness what comforts us. What comforts us when waves of restlessness or uncertainty or worry come over us? And what challenges us? What engages us? What keeps us interested? What is our passion? And then also what new rituals and routines and healthy rhythms support and sustain us? And during this whole pandemic and so much of the time when we were all sheltering in place, we had to learn new ways of doing things. So new rituals. Some of the folks that I'm working with actually started doing some guided meditations that they had never done before, and coming up with some new routines because maybe we weren't going out as much. And so we had to figure out things that we could do at home to keep us healthy and keep our bodies moving. And then just thinking about ways to support and sustain ourselves. So we're going to talk about encouraging a shapely brain this afternoon. So the section 1, we're going to talk about the brain and neuroplasticity. Section 2, we're going to look at the 4 pillars of a healthy mind. Section 3, we're going to look at practices and tools that support a healthy brain. And then we'll just summarize the whole thing in section 4. So here we have the gentleman, and he's at the doctor's, and he says, how much longer do I have before I have to change to a healthy lifestyle? Well, do we do this? Do we say, oh, I will get to it. Let me do it tomorrow. I'll start another day. And I should do this. I should do that. And I think what we were learning too from Dr. Ornish and Dr. Madison is that lifestyle is so important, that we can't change our genetic makeup, but we can change our lifestyle. We can add healthy ways of living. We can let go of unhealthy ways of living. And so this is really important to keep in mind. So well-being is a skill. And this is a really important concept because if it's a skill, it can be learned, it can be practiced, it can be strengthened. And well-being is our experience of health, happiness, and comfort. And now more than ever, it's really important to ask ourselves, what feels safe to me? We all have a new relationship with safety. We never thought about it as much as we've had to think about it during this pandemic. But finding our sense of comfort in our comfort zone and finding some happiness and health. So let's start out with the brain and neuroplasticity. Okay, so here's our groovy brain. So the brain is about a cantaloupe-sized structure. It's about 3 pounds, and it contains 100 billion neurons, 100 billion brain cells. And also, what we also want to keep in mind is the connections, that the number of possible connections between neurons is 100 trillion. And the brain is the organ that's designed to learn. So that is why it can change with different experiences. It wasn't until 1998 that we learned about neurogenesis, that the brain can actually grow new neurons. We can regenerate new neurons, especially in the hippocampus, which is the memory center, and in our olfactory bulbs. So this is really interesting and helpful to know about because there's a lot that we can do to grow new branches on our neurons. So let's just take a picture here and look at a neuron. So if we look at the dendrites, this is where through lifestyle changes, interventions, omissions, and additions, that we can have our branches continue to grow on our neurons. So we may lose neurons as we get older, but the ones that we have, they can become more and more robust with a healthy lifestyle and the healthy thinking that we're going to talk about today. So connections matter. We know that. Neurons communicate with each other across synapses, forming connections that enable us to do everything from moving our bodies to thinking and feeling. And if you think of these networks as paths, the more often they are used, the more established they become in the brain. So here's a nice picture of the space between two neurons is called the synapse. So in that space is where information goes from one neuron to the next neuron. So this is a very important part of our brain structure. It's in the synapses that when folks are taking an antidepressant medication, this is the space where instead of the neurotransmitters that help us with feeling good and feeling rested and all, that neurotransmitter stays there. So that's why they're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So instead of them being taken up by the next neuron right away, they stay in the brain and they bathe more in that synapse area. So neuroplasticity, you may have heard this term. I know that Dr. Madison and Dr. Ornish talked about it in their webinars. So this refers to the lifelong capacity of the brain to change and rewire itself in response to, one, stimulation of learning and experience, what we will talk about this afternoon. And then Dr. Ornish and Dr. Madison talked more about the lifestyle additions, omissions, and changes, right? We know that physical activity increases blood flow to the brain. It helps us to use more energy so that at night when we go to sleep, we're more likely to fall asleep because we've expended energy during the day. Socialization, our ability to connect with each other, our ability to be social and to entertain other people's perspective on things. We know how we feel about something, but if you're socializing and you're talking with someone about a book or a movie, you're entertaining their idea. And intellectual stimulation. So lectures and reading books and being curious about things and looking into things that you find are interesting, very important for our brains. Quality sleep, right? A lot happens when we're sleeping. There's certainly, we know it's a restorative process because we know when we don't have a good night's sleep, we don't feel that great. But we also know now that during sleep, that the clumps of protein that may accumulate in the brain, that they get washed out through the cerebral spinal fluid. We also now know that we consolidate short-term to long-term memory during our sleep. So very important is to make sure that you get proper sleep. And if you're not, it would be something you might want to talk to your doctor about or look up some of the sleep hygiene techniques on the web. Stress reducing behaviors. So we'll talk about that, because we know that stress increases our likelihood that we're not going to remember the things that we want to remember. Sort of that idea of the tip of the tongue, word finding difficulties. When we get older, the brain tells us that it's aging by having it difficult for us to come up with the right word when we want it. So if we're less stressed, we're going to be more likely to be able to come up with the word that we want. Rehabilitation. So physical, occupational, cognitive speech therapies, and mental health interventions. So all of these prove to us that the brain is malleable, that the brain changes with different experiences. When I was at Laguna Honda Hospital as an intern in neuropsychology, folks would come in, patients would come in, and they were all bandaged up and they had had either a cerebral vascular accident, a stroke, or perhaps they were in a motor vehicle accident or had a traumatic brain injury from a fall. And they were very impaired. But after weeks of physical and occupational and cognitive therapies and speech therapies, it was amazing to see that the brain would compensate for the areas that had been atrophied from these different problems. And so what we saw was that the person was able to regain much of their functioning because of the therapies that they had been involved in. So this lets us know that the brain is able to continue to grow new extensions and new connections throughout our lifetimes. I like this visual because it shows us the idea of experience-dependent plasticity. So here we have this mouse, and the first few days, he's learning how to climb the rope. And then after the fourth day, through the fourth to seventh day, what we're seeing in the brain is neuronal level changes. So there are more connections, more synapses. Then through day 8 through 10, what we see is that there's a greater amount of the cortex, the bark of the brain, dedicated to that skill. So we know that what we do does make a difference, and it makes a difference in the structure of our brains. So you've heard the expression, use it or lose it, right? What that means is that our brain prunes away connections between neurons that don't get used. You know, if they don't get used, they think they're not worthwhile and they just go away. But the brain builds up connections that get used more frequently. So the more you do something, the stronger and more efficient the connections become. Oliver Sacks, who many of you may have read some of his books, he was a British neurologist and a historian of science, quite an amazing author. He said, just as physical activity is essential to maintaining a healthy body, challenging one's brain, keeping it active, engaged, flexible, and playful is not only fun, it's essential to cognitive fitness. So environmental enrichment, what are we talking about when we talk about environmental enrichment? Well, before we get into some of the activities that promote cognitive fitness, I just wanted to introduce Marion Diamond, who was a neuroanatomist at UC Berkeley. She did a lot of work with rats and mice around this idea of an enriched environment is a way to increase more of the brains of the mice. So what she did was she would have mice just in a cage and they would just have food and water. Then there'd be another cage that had mice in it with not only food and water, but they had games and there were much more mice there. And what they did with those mice too is that they would take them out of the cage and they would hold them. So what they found out after was that the mice that were just in a cage with only food and water, their brains were not as robust as the brains that were in the cage with lots of things going on and wheels for the mice to play with, and those mice were held. So it tells us a lot about physical touch. It tells us a lot about socialization in terms of brain structure. So some of the activities that we can engage in to promote cognitive fitness. We can watch a movie, talk about it with somebody else, take a course in an area of interest, participate in a challenging game, either on your own or with other people, exposing yourself to different auditory, visual, olfactory, and gustatory stimuli, preparing a nice meal, smelling something beautiful, reading or listening to an interesting book, article, lecture, being part of a group, a club, an organization, a community. These are all ways that we promote our cognitive fitness. So here we have poll number 1 that Lola's going to come on and help us with. But what we'd like you to do is name one practice you engage in regularly that contributes to your cognitive fitness.
All right, Dr. Meiselman, do you see that poll on screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so everyone, you have about 30 seconds here to answer this question. Name one practice you engage in regularly that contributes to your cognitive fitness. Do you watch a movie, take a course, participate in a game, prepare a meal, read a book, join a group? So Dr. Meiselman, we were talking about this earlier, and we were talking about how preparing a meal actually contributes to cognitive fitness. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's interesting because I recently purchased an Instapot, and it's so great because you can be so creative. You could just choose the kinds of foods that you're interested, even look in your refrigerator, what you have, and you can make this whole meal. And it's it's helpful because what you're doing is you're having to measure things out. You're having to look in your cupboard, see what's there, what you can put into it, chop the different vegetables. So it really is about executive functioning skills, our planning, organizing, sequencing, and following through on something. And you get a great meal and it doesn't take that long to cook it.
Well, next time somebody tells me, oh, I don't cook, my answer is going to be to them, well, you should, because it's good for your brain. All right, so we've had about 69, 70% of people take this poll. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and let's look at the results. So let me share that on screen here. So everybody should be able to see this. It's pretty distributed here, but 38%, that's the highest, read a book. That's wonderful, because we know that reading is so good for our brains. So I'm glad to see that so many people participate in reading. All right, I will turn this back over to you now.
And what I also love about senior living communities too is that there are book clubs. And even if you're not a member of a book club, if you're not a person that's doing something like that, you can also just talk to a friend and say, let's read this book together and talk about it. Because that is another way that we engage our intellectual functioning, is by entertaining other people's perspectives on things. So that's really important. Okay, hold on a second. Let's move to the next screen here. Okay, so the next section, we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of a healthy mind. And this is information from Richie Davidson, who is the founder and chair of the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. So the first pillar of a healthy mind is awareness. And that makes a lot of sense, because if we're not aware of something, we're not going to be able to change it or shift it or make it more healthy for us, or let go of it if it's not healthy for us. But it's the capacity to focus and direct our attention with intention and to resist distraction. As a neuropsychologist, I'm always saying that the enemy of memory consolidation is distraction. And the friend of memory consolidation is our ability to pay attention. So part of awareness is mindfulness. And I always like to bring up the idea of mindfulness, because basically mindfulness is paying attention with intention in the present moment. And one of the most important pieces of mindfulness is paying attention with kindness toward ourselves, with a non-judgmental awareness. So we're much more likely to be with an experience and then remember it later if we're paying attention in a very particular way. And so what we notice is that if I'm paying attention with intention in the present moment with kindness toward myself, then I'm going to remember the event that I went to, or the conversation that I have with a good friend. So if someone introduces themselves to me and 5 seconds later, I say, I don't even remember what they said their name was, because I wasn't paying attention. So we really need to make meaning out of our moments. And the way we do that is we linger with it and we stay with it. And we remind ourselves to stay in the present moment. Sometimes our mind wanders off. That's what minds do. But bring it back to the present moment. Stay here. Stay right here. So let's think about how awareness it's like a flashlight. Where awareness goes, energy flows. So what we practice in our lives becomes stronger in our lives. So think about that. If we wake up in the morning and we say, thank you, universe, I have another day to be kind to myself, to be kind to other people, to be interested in what's happening in the world, to finish some of the things that I'm interested in finishing, that's where our energy is going. But if we wake up in the morning and say, oh no, another day, it's a very different feeling. So think about how, if you want to feel good and feel some sense of comfort, you have to realize where you're shining the flashlight. Are you shining it on the things that you can no longer do, on your limitations, Are you shining the flashlight on the things that you can do, the ways that you can connect with other people, contribute to your community? So I like this quote by James Baraz, who wrote the book Awakening Joy, and he's one of the founding fathers of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is in Woodacre in Marin. And he says, mindfulness is simply being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different. Enjoying the pleasant without holding on when it changes, which it will. Being with the unpleasant without fearing it will always be this way, which it won't. Right? I mean, one of the things that's a good news is that bad feelings or unwelcome feelings, they don't stay with us. Feelings are fleeting, and we'll talk about how to soak in more of the good ones and let them linger in awareness. So pillar number 2 that Dr. Davidson talks about is caring connection. So maintaining interpersonal relationships that are characterized by appreciation, by gratitude, by kindness, by compassion, right? Compassion is this idea that we notice and identify the suffering in other people, and we go toward them to see if we can be helpful. And we'll also talk a little bit about inner compassion, right? Inner compassion is the idea that we recognize our own suffering, and we want our own suffering to be less. So caring connection also means being part of a community. Dr. Ornish talked about this when he was talking about lifestyles impacting the brain. So being a part of a community, which is one of the reasons I really love working with folks who are living in senior living places, because there's lots of opportunities to connect. You have your time to have your privacy in your own apartment, but you also have this capacity to connect and to be part of a community. Feeling included, heard, and valued, it reduces our suffering and it enhances our healing. It enhances our healing. Pillar number 3 in healthy minds is insight into ourselves. So having some curiosity about how our mind works. Are you aware of the stories you tell yourself about who you are? Are those stories helpful or harmful to you? Sometimes you get this wave of anxiety or worry that comes over you, and it's at that moment that it's important to ask yourself, what was I just thinking? And a lot of times it may have been something that was hurtful to ourselves, some way that we weren't being on our own team, that we weren't being a friend to ourselves. So we need to be aware of the narratives of what we're telling ourselves about ourselves. So do you find time to acknowledge and savor your inner strengths? Sometimes it's important just to bring to mind, just like we're going to talk about a gratitude list, but what about bringing in your own list of your inner strengths? So here we are, we're going to do poll number 2. So naming one of your many inner strengths. So Lola's going to come on and help us with this. Okay, great.
All right, everybody should be able to see poll number 2. Name one of your inner strengths. So, I read through this early and I was trying to get it down to just one. Definitely not sense of humor for me. Patience, maybe a little bit. Resilience, I'd like to think so. I would say compassion would be one of my inner strengths. What about you, Dr. Meiselman?
I think as a psychotherapist, it needs to be that I'm a good listener, because much of the time that's what therapists do. We're listening more than we're talking, hopefully.
Great. Well, we have about 50% who have answered so far. Give it another couple of seconds so that as many people can answer as wants to participate. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So you should see on your screen. So a lot of people did not choose patience. So good listeners on their sense of humor. We have some funny people in the audience. I would love to learn how to be more humorous myself. But thank you everybody for participating in this poll.
Great. So, and I think too, just talking about patience, John Kabat-Zinn, who wrote the book Full Catastrophe Living, and he's a psychologist, and he started the program, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program. It's a 8-week program where you learn about mindfulness meditation and yoga. But he says that patience is something that we have to develop over time, in that a butterfly doesn't become a butterfly from a caterpillar because we want it to right then. You know, it has a process that it goes through, and that we too have to be patient, and we have to give ourselves some time. You know, sometimes we don't even realize that we have a relationship to time. You know, there's not enough time. I don't want to waste my time. But what if we can look at it a little bit differently and say, you know, I have plenty of time. You know, I have enough time to do the things that I want to do. So patience is one of those qualities, those inner strengths that we can develop. It is a skill that we can develop. And I think this whole pandemic and shelter in place has really forced us all to slow down, right? What's the rush? Slow down. So I like this cartoon. So you see the two sharks and they're going off to this feeding frenzy. And he says, I know it sounds weird, Bill, but it's true. When I focus on what I can bring to the feeding frenzy instead of what I get from it, I feel a whole lot better about myself. You know, so do we notice what our inner strengths are? And do we notice that we can be a good friend? You know, a lot of times we felt during this pandemic, oh, I don't want to call so-and-so, I have nothing to say to them. But it wasn't the reason we weren't calling was to entertain them. We're calling to connect. We're calling to say, hi, I was just thinking about you. So pillar number 4, sense of meaning and purpose. So what we're trying to do is infuse meaning in what we do, connecting and contributing to something beyond ourselves. Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote the book, A Man's Search for Meaning, he outlined 3 ways to find meaning in life: through our work, through love, and through suffering. And suffering is a way that we connect with each other, through our grief, because we've all been through things, we've all had losses, you know, whether it be of another person or of some of our own functioning cognitively, sensory awareness wise. So our suffering is a way that we are expressing our common humanity, that we can connect with other people because we all understand what suffering is like. But building a sense of purpose and meaning into our lives is a dynamic process. What had purpose and meaning for us at one stage of our lives may be very different, and dynamically is going to be different as we get older, as we grow and grow older. But this is where we build resiliency, this capacity to recover from adversity. And all of us sitting here today, we couldn't have gotten to where we are without having a sense of resilience, without being able to bounce back from difficult times. So let's look at some tools and some practices to support a healthy brain. So meditation. So Dr. Ornish talked about meditation during his talk. But meditation is learning to focus your awareness and direct it onto an object, whether it be the breath. In mindfulness meditation, that's what we're doing. We're focusing on our breath. And a way that you can do that is, you know, hand on heart center, hand on navel center. Inhale through the nose, chest and belly rise. Exhale, chest and belly fall back. So it's a rising and a falling of our breath through. We can feel it on the palms of our hands. And this is a way that we also notice how much the mind tends to wander. Because when you do a few moments of meditation, you notice that your mind may be wandering off. Oh, there I go, thinking, planning, worrying, planning. And all you do is you notice that with a gentle awareness, with a kindness towards self, and bring yourself back to inhaling and exhaling. And usually it's you're inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. And you know, when you get stressed out, a friend may say to you, take a few deep breaths. Why do they say that? Because it does work. Inhaling and exhaling activates the relaxation response. So it keeps us feeling more calm. We can also meditate on a phrase or a word that we repeat silently to ourselves, whatever that may be for you. Calm, kind. Or sometimes you have some sort of inspirational passage. I really love the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You know, sometimes just looking up at the sky gives us that sense of expansiveness, right? That there's a sense that there's something greater than ourselves. And an image in the mind's eye. Maybe you love the ocean, maybe you love the lakes, maybe you love just being out in the garden. So you could picture that as well. So being kind contributes to a healthy mind. So there's been a lot of research. There's been research with Dr. Davidson's group at University of Wisconsin at Madison. There's been right around here in Palo Alto at Stanford University. They have a lot of compassion programs there. And training in loving kindness, meditation, and compassion can result in greater altruistic behavior and related changes in the brain regions involved in emotion regulation and positive emotions, right? So meditating can help us to not be so reactive, right? So that we respond instead of react. So that we are regulating our emotions rather than our emotions regulating us. So what I thought we would do right now is just take a few moments and let's practice a meditation together. I'm sure some of you have meditated before. Many of you probably have a regular practice. Some of you maybe have never done it at all. So let's take a few moments and do a meditation together on healthy thoughts. So just want you to find your feet on the floor, in the wheelchair pedals, or whatever it is, it's your experience right now. And just feel the sits bones on the cushion of your chair. And then maybe just bring your shoulders up towards your ears and then roll them back down so that there's a nice feeling of spaciousness between the ears and your shoulders. And then just let your eyes gaze softly in front of you or close them gently, whatever's more comfortable for you. And just notice that you're breathing. Just notice that air is entering and exiting your body. Take a deep inhalation through the nose, followed by a long and slow exhalation. Let this action anchor you to this moment, here and now. Allow yourself to linger in this moment and begin to notice what you notice. Become aware of how you're feeling in this moment in your body. Any sensations that are uncomfortable, direct a soothing breath there. Now, direct your attention to your thoughts. Gently rest your attention on a thought that brings a smile to your heart. Perhaps you're thinking of a person, a pet, a place, an event, or a meaningful moment in your life. Bring a visual image to mind that reminds you of that person, pet, place, or meaningful moment. Rest your awareness on that image. Take another deep inhalation in and savor those images in your mind's eye. And with your exhale, let those heartfelt feelings linger in awareness. Celebrate thoughts that create spaciousness. May your mind wander in safe neighborhoods. May you find comfort in your thoughts. May you find peace of mind. May you guide your thoughts to a place of peace that are anchored in serenity. And now you can flutter your eyes open if they were closed and just come back together. And just maybe think for a moment how you're feeling right now. This is something that you can do whenever you want to do it. You know, this is something that you could start out in the morning and have a few moments of a guided meditation, or before you go to sleep at night. You know, a lot of times it's difficult for some of us to fall asleep or it's difficult for some of us to stay asleep. So if you want to, before you fall asleep and you're having a difficult time, again, hand on the heart center, hand on navel center, and just inhale into the palms of your hands and exhale. Feel the body moving as you breathe. And just remind yourself, may I feel calm? May I feel tired? So another practice that we can look at, one is called taking in the good, and the other one is gratitude, which many of us are familiar with. But Rick Hanson talked to us. He's a neuropsychologist, and in his book, Hardwiring Happiness, he talked about this idea of taking in the good moments. So in any day, lots of good things happen, right? You have your first cup of coffee or tea in the morning, and it warms you up and it's getting you ready for your day. You know, you look at somebody and they smile at you. Well, usually, you know, now with the mask, it's a little bit harder. But you know, you open the door for somebody, or you just have a lovely walk where you're looking at some beautiful flowers, you're taking in the colors, the leaves are changing now. So 20 seconds of focusing on positive and pleasing experiences, and or reminding yourself of your inner strengths, which we did earlier, and and our blessings can actually tune the amygdala, which is a center for emotions, away from grabbing onto negative materials by focusing on more positive ideas. So we soak in the goodness in the moment and we remind ourselves of the good moments later. And then we share it with a friend to convert the good moment to a lasting experience and a permanent groove in the brain. So very simple to do. You know, you have a nice walk or something and you think about it later, you mention it to somebody, you know, we should take this walk together. You know, it was 20 minutes and it was so beautiful and I felt so good after. You know, so this is ways that we're taking our good moments and we're making them into good experiences that we can tap into later. We can also consider a gratitude practice. Lots and lots of research shows that gratitude practices are very helpful for us. They're helpful for our mental health and our sense of well-being. One is a gratitude buddy, where you call somebody up maybe every day or a few days a week. You both decide that you're going to do this, and you say, you know, I'm really grateful for my health today. What are you grateful for? So we're bringing it to mind. We need to bring these things to mind. There was this other study done at the University of Pennsylvania where at the end of the day, they took 2,000 people that were experiencing depressive symptoms, and half of them were asked at the end of the day to think about 3 things that went well. You know, maybe it didn't rain so they could get out in the fresh air, or maybe it rained so their garden was growing, whatever it might be. Or they called that person, or they finished that chapter in the book that they wanted to read. You know, so just bringing to mind 3 things that went well during the day actually helped people decrease their level of depressive symptoms. And what happened was, even 6 months after the study was done, folks were still doing these practices and they were feeling better because their mind was tuned into, they were shining the flashlight on the things that were going well in their lives. I mean, certainly a lot of things don't go so well, but those are the things that we don't always want to dwell on. A gratitude list. Write down a few things that you're grateful for. And when you start to feel down in the dumpsters, bring it out and look at it and remind yourself of what you're grateful for. Next Thursday's Thanksgiving, right? So it's a perfect time to be priming ourselves to think about what's important to us, what we're grateful for. I love this poem by Mary Oliver. It's very short, but it gets to the point of what we've been talking about. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. Right? So you pay attention, you bring to awareness something, and then we're astonished, right? So you pay attention to the beautiful flower and you're astonished by the colors in it. And then you tell about it. So you share it with somebody else. Living in community, it's really easy to be able to do that piece of it, to tell about it, to share it with somebody else. Practice number 3, stress reduction and well-being strategies. So number 1, keep moving, stay active, right? Dr. Madison and Dr. Ornish talked about this. We've got to keep moving. We've got to keep the body active. We've got to do physical activity, whatever that means for us with the resources that we have in our functioning now. You know, if some of us are in a wheelchair and a walker and we can't do some of the yoga exercises on the floor, well, there's chair yoga now, right? So there's lots of ways that we can move the upper body if we're not able to move the bottom parts of our bodies the way we used to. Dancing, stretching, yoga. Get some fresh air. Take a walk, take a stroll, take a 20-minute nap. I mean, naps can be really helpful. You know, we don't want to take a nap for a long period of time, but even just taking a 20-minute nap or just getting horizontal and putting on some good music and just listening to something, right? So this is another way that we reduce our stress. And so easy now to listen to music. A lot of us have devices like Alexa or Echo, and we can put on good music whenever we want to, or recite a favorite poem or a prayer or an affirmation. So practice number 4 is cognitive behavioral theory. And I just want to get us a little bit familiar with this. But the idea of CBT is that our thoughts impact our feelings, which then in turn impact our behavior. So if we have a thought that we are feeling strong and healthy, then the feeling is that we feel good. And then if we feel good, we're going to be more likely to choose a behavior that's going to be healthy for us. You know, I want to go take that walk. I want to go take that aquasize class. So that we're actually putting ourselves in a better place when we notice how much our thoughts impact our feelings, which then impact what we do or what we don't do. So some cognitive behavioral intervention strategies, you know, you can go to a therapist who will teach you about CBT. But if we wanted to do some of these practices on our own, one of the ways we could do it is we challenge distorted thoughts and stories. You know, what's the evidence to support that? You know, that thought that we have, you know, avoid always and never. I'm always going to be overweight. I'm never going to feel like I fit in. Well, that creates no space at all for any other kind of option, right? So if we can avoid the always and the never, we're in a better position to think about how we have some space, we have choices, we have options. So say no to rumination and dwelling. You know, rumination and dwelling, especially rumination, is really psychopathology, right? It's really about doing something that's disease-oriented for us. Depression and anxiety really have a lot of rumination involved in it. We think about the same thing over and over again, and it just destroys our sense of spirit. So we want to notice when we're continuing to dwell on something. And if it's not healthy, if it's not making us feel good, we need to change the storyline. We need to shine the flashlight somewhere else. The pause button. I love this quote by Viktor Frankl. He, as we mentioned, he was a Holocaust survivor and a psychiatrist, and he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom, right? Lies our growth and our freedom. So here we notice that we do need to push the pause button sometimes, right? We don't want to be impulsive. We don't want to react. We want to respond. You know, if we want to deepen our relationships with other people and keep our relationships healthy, then we need to notice what it is that we're feeling. And we're going to need to maybe pause before we say something, right? Because otherwise we say something and then we think, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And you feel like you need to pick up the pieces later. But if we actually see that there's a space between the stimulus and the response, we have a choice. We have options. Very freeing, very liberating to remind yourself. If someone invites you to do something and you're not really sure, you don't have to say yes and then feel like later, oh no, I don't want to go. What am I going to say? I'll think about it. Let me think. Thanks for the invitation. Let me think about it. Right? We have choices. Just holding on to the story that we can stay eternally young, that we can avoid illness, that we can live forever, that we can hold on to our loved ones and possessions, and we can escape the consequences of our actions, make us happy. Well, here are the two ladies walking down the street together, and one says to the other, I'm doing a lot better now that I'm back in denial. Do we do that? Do we go to the place of denial? When in fact, what would be more helpful is for us to be more aware, right? To make some choices that are healthy for us. So let's just go through a summary of what we talked about today. Cultivating well-being. So I'm just going to read these. We can read them together. So number one, be aware of when you're entering the tunnel of chronic negative thinking or climbing the ladder of rumination. So notice what you notice. Notice when you start climbing that ladder, and then ask yourself, do I need to go there? Am I starting to feel nervous and anxious? And invite a deep inhalation followed by a long exhalation, and come back to the present moment. So use your inhale and your exhale as an anchor to keep you in the present moment, right? Stay here. Don't let the mind wander off into unsafe neighborhoods, right? Stay here in this moment. So if we can notice when we're starting to go there and be aware, we're more likely to be able to change and shift that focus onto something that either feels good or is more neutral. Treat yourself like you would treat a dear friend. And if you start to think about some of the negative self-talk that you have, some of the things that you say to yourself, snap out of it, that's ridiculous. You would never say that to a dear friend. If a friend came to you and they were worried or concerned or afraid, you would show your compassion. You would show your empathy. Wow, that sounds really hard. Is there anything I can do to be helpful? Right? So treat yourself the way you would treat a friend. And take in the good moments. Lots of good moments. Sunset is beautiful. Take in those good moments and let them linger in your mind's eye. And when you're feeling down, you can bring that image back to mind. So if we take in the good moments and we let them linger in awareness, then they become good experiences. Implement gratitude practices. Just as we mentioned, Thanksgiving is coming up. So let's start now. We can start a week before Thanksgiving to start thinking about what we're grateful for. Friends, family, our health, our ability to do some of the things that we want to do. The more expansiveness of the world right now, now that things have opened up a little bit more. Meditate. Right? And it doesn't have to be long time of meditation. Mindful structured breathing. Just do a few rounds of inhaling 1, 2, 3, exhaling 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Longer exhalation is going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system that helps us to stay calm, to rest and digest. Be astonished, right? When we're astonished, we're bringing awe into our world, right? That we take the ordinary and we make it extraordinary. And stay connected to what matters to you. Do we ask ourselves that? What's important to me? What matters to me? And am I doing the things that are in tune with what I say matters to me? What brings me a sense of harmony? And lastly, a mindful overview. what we rest our attention on influences our mood and shapes the brain. We can choose the experience that directs the brain's learning toward better functioning. Experience is the catalyst of the brain's neuroplasticity. We can continue to learn and to make new synapses throughout our entire lives. Environmental enrichment. Harmonious and healthy living is achieved by engaging in practices, programs, routines, and experiences that stimulate the mind, the body, and the spirit. That's why I love senior living communities, because you always have opportunities, usually just an elevator ride away, to engage in different kinds of programs and practices and meet new people. Adult day health centers are the same way. You get an opportunity to be with other people, to practice your socialization skills. And 5, keep in mind that engagement in a heart and brain smart lifestyle is just as essential as letting go of patterns of behavior and ways of thinking that contribute to our suffering and to our discord. So thank you all for your attention today. And I am going to bring it back to Lola. So
now's the time to turn it over to the audience to ask questions. And I just want to read a couple of things here. Linda said she really appreciates this presentation, and we've got some great comments in here. David said that he felt very joyful during the meditation. Shirley said that she envisioned her pet during the meditation. So there's a lot of engagement that's happening. One question did come in, the first one. How do you recover from brain fog as a result of general anesthesia, not having problems previous to the general anesthesia?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, because I think, especially as we get older, when we go under general anesthesia, the blood pressure changes can impact the brain. And, I think what we know now, we know about neuroplasticity. We know that the brain is malleable. We know that we can continue to make our neurons more robust. So if something happened through anesthesia where we're feeling this brain fog, I think what you need to do is to implement some of these heart and brain smart lifestyle interventions. And I would recommend most of all is physical activity, whatever that looks like for you, with the resources that you have in your own functioning now.
And Dr. Meiselman, you referred to a couple of other presentations, both by Dr. Madison and Dr. Ornish. Both those presentations are available on our YouTube page, and I will make sure that everybody on this Zoom call today gets a link to those presentations. So if they have not already watched them, this is session number 3 in a 3-part brain health series. And so the other 2 presentations had a lot of great information in them. All right, so we have Gregory here asking, could you quickly go over the pillars and what activities and practices help grow the brain neurons?
Okay, so we talked about awareness as number 1, the first pillar. So basically we're talking about paying attention. Right? That if we want to consolidate short-term to long-term memory, we're going to have to pay attention in a very particular way. So that would be pillar number 1. We're also talking about, in awareness and paying attention, we're talking about doing some meditation so that we're keeping the brain, teaching the brain to stay focused, right? Because when it gets distracted, that's when we forget things, right? So meditation teaches us that our brain wanders off. And so we bring it back to the present moment with the inhale and the exhale. So awareness would be number 1 of the pillars. And then number 2 is, we talked about caring connection, right? Staying connected with friends and family, socializing, very, very important, right? And then we talked about the idea of knowing what our own selves, right? So insight into our own selves. What's our mind chatter? What are we telling ourselves? What are the stories that we tell ourselves? What's the narrative? If it's something that's bringing us down and it's not helpful to us, then we need to stop doing that, right? We have to reframe the story so that it doesn't feel so difficult and so hard to be with. And then we talked about meaning and purpose. Lots of research now that our cognitive functioning is actually enhanced by our feeling that our life has meaning. And the meaning is going to be different at the different stages of our lives. So maybe as we grow and grow older, meaning for us is that we deepen our relationships with our friends and family, that we get to know ourselves better. Right? There's been some research to show that cognitive functioning is enhanced and memory tests are higher for folks who have a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. And maybe not, we can't come up with it right away what our sense of purpose and meaning is. But that's also something worthy of contemplation. Take a few moments every day and ask yourself, what's meaningful to me?
Wonderful. Thank you for recapping that. That was a wonderful, wonderful way to look at things. And I took so much from that. Sandra asks, do activities such as learning a new language or instrument, such as the piano, enhance our brain neuroplasticity and memory? Are there top activities for this?
Yes. So learning a language, learning an instrument, there's been a lot of research to show that areas of the brain do grow and get more robust because we're doing these kinds of activities and practices. There's been lots of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs they're called, of brains of London cab drivers, and they have to learn all the spaghetti streets, and they go through a long training as cab drivers. And what they've seen is that when they look under the fMRIs, when they look at their brains, they actually have a more robust area of the brain, the hippocampus, and that's different than people who aren't London cab drivers, so that we know that there are areas that can continue to grow and get more robust depending on what your skill is. And we know that well-being is a skill, so it can be practiced, it can be strengthened over time. So yes, getting out of our comfort zone to try something new. We talk about variety, we talk about novelty, we talk about doing things more. So, if you're doing just crossword puzzles, maybe you need to do crossword puzzles and bridge and Sudoku. Maybe you need to advance to the next level of something. You need to do it often. So yes, that answers the question.
One of our attendees said that they make the same food over and over again. And, based on your advice here, try making something different.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So be creative. Yes.
So Linda asked, could we get a list of the authors and books that you mentioned? And yes, we can put that together and send that out in the recap email we send next week.
Yeah. And I can send you a list of my brain health resources too, Lola, and you can put that on your website too if you want.
Fantastic. Chris asks, are jigsaw puzzles good for the brain?
Anything that you do that you are interested in, engaged in, the idea of flow, what was written by a Hungarian psychologist, the book Flow, where he talks about this idea, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, that if we can find something that we're interested in, and time goes by and we're interested in this and we're fully engaged in it, that is good for the brain. So yes, anything that because what you're doing really is you're focusing, right? And that's what we're talking about, is how do we grow our awareness skills? How do we pay attention in a very particular way? And so if we're doing some of these mental aerobic exercises, yes, it's good for the brain.
And it's, I know like for jigsaw puzzles, I don't do it as often as I would like to, but it is a different way of using my brain. And I like it so much better than sitting there watching TV, because you're just passively watching or being on my phone. It's actually a break for my brain when I get to do something that's more like a game.
And it's also, it's a mindfulness exercise, doing a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, you are engaged in it. So that's good. It's healthy.
So Virginia says, I think it takes some courage to change a mindset long cultivated throughout a lifetime. And that's the truth. Are there ways to access and learn the courage to change?
Mm,
A good one.
Question. Yes. So I think what we need to do there is to be kind to ourselves and to realize that, it's sort of like the idea of patience, that the caterpillar didn't become the butterfly because you wanted it to. It takes time, it has to go through a process. And I think that to find courage, what we need to do is have a healthy relationship with ourselves, right? Because you wake up with yourself, you spend the day with yourself, you go to sleep with yourself. What an important relationship to nurture. And if we can start out with kindness toward ourselves, then we're in a better position to find the courage to do the things that we want to do.
Right, definitely. So Rebecca says that her husband passed away 3 years ago, and I'm sorry to hear about that, Rebecca. She feels his spirit is still with her, and she talks to him every day. He sends her help anytime she asks for it. Now she asks, is that okay, or is she weird?
That is so okay. I think that's so lovely. I think it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who said that all that we love becomes a part of us. And, I almost have chills right now in thinking about that, because I think that's what we need to do, is how do we keep the person alive? When we love deeply, we're going to feel lost deeply. Right.
Yes.
And so we bring them in no matter how we can. Yesterday I was sitting outside and a hummingbird came so close to me. It was unbelievable. I could hear its wings flapping. And I said to myself, I wonder if that's my father. It's like you can feel, I think it's wonderful, Rebecca. God, it's beautiful.
Yes. And I talk to my grandmas all the time. So there's nothing weird about that. So we have someone who says, why looking at a mirror in the morning and making funny faces feels so good? Is that laughing at yourself?
You know what? If it feels good, do it. We all have our rituals and routines and rhythms, right? And if it works for you and it makes you feel good, it's going to put you in a healthier place to do the things that you need to do in the day, or be the person you want to be in the day. So keep on doing it.
And not just that, if you're making funny faces, you're exercising the muscles in your face.
Yeah, like laughing yoga, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any more questions? Looks like we may have gotten to the end of the questions. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And Dr. Meiselman, any final words?
Well, I just want to thank you, Lola, for putting on these brain health webinars. I think it's so important for us to take the time and talk about it, because I think a lot of what I was speaking about today, they're just reminders. We know what we need to do to stay healthy. And I think just sometimes we just need to put it in your calendar, make an appointment with yourself to do some of the things that you need to do. I mean, we make commitments to other people and we write it down in our schedule. Well, schedule in some time for yourself. Read that chapter in the book that you wanted to read. Take that walk, call that friend you haven't spoken to in a while.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I will call a friend after our webinar today, just because I'm feeling like it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to take the last moment to thank our sponsor today. And to find out more about Senior Services of Northern California, you can visit their website, seniorservicesofnorcal.org. And they are the philanthropic foundation of Sequoia Living that helps raise funds for many of the programs that Sequoia Living offers. And thank you, Dr. Meiselman, for all of your wise expertise. That wisdom is so important to pass on to everybody. And I know that it's going to help a lot of people really make some strides that they've been trying, wishing for. I know that every day I try to do things a little bit better, and definitely mindful meditation has been super helpful for me. So we got a lot of thank yous here, Dr. Meiselman. So many people are thanking you for your presentation today.
All right. Well, thank all of you too for being here.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.